There is a sign. Jesus described it clearly. He gave it a name. He said it would mark the people who had surrendered their minds without knowing it. And here's what gets me. Most people who carry that sign today think they're free. They vote, they go to church, they raise families, they work hard. They believe they are making their own choices. But the sign is there. And once you learn to see it, you see it everywhere. In your neighbor, in your pastor, in the news anchor. Maybe, if you're honest, in the mirror. I want to be careful here, because what I'm about to tell you is not some modern self-help theory. This comes directly from ancient texts, from the words of Jesus himself, not the version sanitized for Sunday morning, but the version they tried to bury. The version they voted to exclude at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, when a group of bishops decided what Christians were and were not allowed to know. Over the next 20 minutes, you're going to learn what that sign is, why it works the way it does, and what you can do, starting today, to check yourself and the people around you. But before I explain the sign, I need to show you something that changes the whole frame of this conversation. It was researching exactly this kind of hidden teaching that led me to start Awakened Minds, because I kept finding the same pattern. The most important things Jesus said were the ones that disappeared from the official record. Let me explain what I mean. You were taught that the Bible is complete, that what you hold in your hands is everything Jesus said and everything the early church believed. Your preacher said so. Your Sunday school teacher confirmed it. The seminary trained your pastor to repeat it. But here's what doesn't add up. The Council of Nicaea happened in 325 AD. That is almost 300 years after Jesus died. 3 centuries passed before anyone decided which texts were official. 300 years of manuscripts, letters, gospels, and teachings that circulated among early Christian communities. And then a committee, convened by the Roman Emperor Constantine, sat down and chose what stayed and what went. Constantine was not a theologian. He was a military commander who needed a unified empire. He needed one version of Christianity, not dozens. What happened to the versions that didn't make the cut? Some were burned. Some were buried. In 1945, a collection of those buried texts was found in clay jars in the Egyptian desert, near a town called Nag Hammadi. 52 documents, gospels, letters, teachings attributed to Jesus and his inner circle. The scholars who studied them were stunned, not because the texts were forgeries, but because they were consistent. They matched the style, the structure, the theological framework of the earliest Christian writings. Elaine Pagels, a professor of religion at Princeton who spent her career studying these documents, wrote that they represent the other side of early Christian history. Not a fringe view. The other side of the whole story. Here's the number that matters. 52 documents recovered, all dating to the first few centuries of Christianity, none of them ever mentioned to you in church. And it is not just Nag Hammadi. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947 in the Qumran caves near the Dead Sea, contained Hebrew and Aramaic texts that described a community of spiritual seekers living outside the official religious structure. They called themselves the Children of Light. They believed that institutional religion had been corrupted, that genuine spiritual experience required direct, personal access to something the official priests were blocking. 2 separate archaeological discoveries. 2 years apart, both pointing in the same direction. Ask yourself why no one connects those dots in a Sunday sermon. If these texts confirmed what you already believe, Why would anyone hide them for 17 centuries? They were hidden because they contain a different picture of Jesus, a teacher not just of love and forgiveness, but of something harder and more dangerous, the mechanics of spiritual control, how it works, who benefits from it, and how to recognize it in yourself. That is where the Archons come in. The word Archon appears dozens of times in the Nag Hammadi texts, in the Gospel of Philip, in the Pistis Sophia, in the Apocryphon of John. In Greek, the word simply means ruler. But in the Gnostic cosmology that Jesus appears to have taught to his inner circle, the Archons are something specific. They are lower-level administrators of a false reality. Forces, or perhaps entities, that maintain the world as it is by keeping human beings confused about what they truly are. The Gnostic texts describe them as neither fully material nor fully spiritual. They operate through systems, through institutions, through the thoughts and beliefs people absorb from their environment and mistake for their own. Now, I want to address something directly, because I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like a conspiracy theory. Here's what I'd say to that. The conspiracy is not hidden. It's open. The mechanism is not supernatural. It's psychological. And it was described 2,000 years ago with an accuracy that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to confirm. A 2019 study from Northwestern University found that the human brain defaults to absorbed beliefs, meaning beliefs received from authoritative sources, as its operating baseline. Changing those beliefs requires a specific kind of conscious effort that most people never make. The brain treats absorbed beliefs as self-generated. You feel like you chose them. You didn't. Bart Ehrman, a New Testament scholar at the University of North Carolina, who himself left evangelical Christianity after years in seminary, has documented in multiple books how early Christian communities held radically different beliefs before Nicaea. Not minor differences. Fundamental disagreements about what Jesus was, what he taught, and what salvation actually meant. His 2003 book, Lost Christianities, catalogs at least a dozen distinct Christian traditions that existed before the 4th century. All of them, except one, were declared heresy. The HeartMath Institute has documented similar findings regarding emotional coherence and decision-making. When a person's emotional state is controlled by external stimuli, their sense of free choice is intact, but their actual autonomy is compromised. They feel free. They are not free. The feeling and the reality are disconnected. That is precisely the condition the Gnostic texts describe when they talk about Archon control. The Archons, as described in the Gnostic texts, work precisely through this mechanism. And Jesus, according to those same texts, described one sign that reveals whether a person is operating from genuine inner awareness or from Archon-absorbed belief. Here is the sign. In the Gospel of Thomas, Logion 70, Jesus says this, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." And in the Pistis Sophia, he goes further. He describes what it looks like when a person cannot bring forth what is within them. He says they speak from the outside inward. Their words come from what they have been given, not from what they have seen. The sign Jesus identified is this: a person controlled by Archons cannot originate. They can only repeat. Let me say that more slowly. Not repeating facts. Everyone repeats facts. I'm talking about something deeper. When you ask such a person why they believe what they believe, they cannot go further than the source they received it from. Their faith is a wall, not a door. Their certainty is borrowed, not earned. Their answers come out clean and preformed, like they were printed somewhere and handed over. There is no friction in their thinking, no uncertainty, no evidence of a mind that has actually wrestled with the question. Jesus called this dead wood. In the Gospel of Philip, the metaphor appears directly. A tree that cannot produce its own fruit, only carry the fruit placed on it by someone else. That is the sign. And the reason I want you to look for it today is this. The people who carry it most completely are often the ones in positions of spiritual and political authority, not because they are evil, but because the system selected for them. The archonic structure, whether you understand it literally or metaphorically, rewards certainty, punishes doubt, and elevates the people who transmit its messages most efficiently. I want to pause here and tell you how I found the specific passage in the Pistis Sophia that made this click for me. It took months of reading through the Nag Hammadi library, cross-referencing with Elaine Pagel's work, specifically her book The Gnostic Gospels, and checking every citation against the original Coptic translations. When I published those findings on Awakened Minds, the response I got from people who study early Christianity for a living confirmed what I had suspected. This material is known in academic circles. It is simply never discussed in public. One professor, who asked not to be named, sent me a message that said, "You've described exactly what the patristic fathers were afraid people would understand." I want to sit with that for a moment. The patristic fathers were the early church leaders who shaped official Christianity after Nicaea. They were afraid people would understand what you are understanding right now. That is not an accident. Let me show you exactly how the suppression works, because this is where it gets personal. To understand who benefits from Archon-controlled thinking, you have to follow the institutional logic. A church that teaches you to find God within yourself has a problem. You don't need the church anymore. You don't need the priest as intermediary. You don't need the hierarchy, the tithe, the confession booth, or the doctrinal authority. The global religious industry generates somewhere north of $1.2 trillion annually. That number includes real estate, donations, media, publishing, and tax exemptions that secular organizations do not receive. A spiritually self-sufficient congregation is not a revenue model. The Gnostic teachings that were buried at Nag Hammadi were dangerous to that model. They taught that the kingdom of God was inside you, not above you. That spiritual authority was personal, not institutional. That the role of a teacher was to help you see what you already contained, not to manage your access to something external. When those teachings were declared heresy, in the 4th century, it was not purely theological. It was organizational. The church needed the archonic structure, whether its leaders recognized it by that name or not. Here's how the control is maintained today. First, emotional dependency is cultivated. Salvation is offered as something you can lose. Fear keeps the congregation returning. A Gallup survey from 2021 found that 62% of regular churchgoers reported that fear of divine judgment played a role in their religious practice. Fear is the Archon's primary channel, according to the Pistis Sophia. Second, intellectual questioning is reframed as spiritual danger. Doubt is not treated as a healthy part of faith formation. It is treated as the enemy of faith. Anyone who asks the wrong questions is redirected, not answered. Third, community belonging is conditional on doctrinal compliance. Leaving the belief means losing the people. And for many, especially older adults who built their entire social world inside a congregation, that cost is too high. You are not paying with money alone. You are paying with belonging, identity, and the comfort of not having to think again from scratch about the biggest questions in human life. That is the price they extract. And most people pay it without realizing there was a transaction. Now, the good news. Jesus described the sign not to make you despair, but because you can only fix what you can see. Here's what you can do. 3 steps. Practical. Start this week. The first one is the simplest and the most uncomfortable. Ask yourself, what is one belief I hold that I have never seriously questioned? Not a belief you've defended. Not a belief you've explained. A belief you have simply never subjected to the friction of genuine doubt. Pick it, write it down, then spend 30 minutes looking for the strongest possible case against it. Not to abandon the belief, just to find out whether it can survive contact with the opposition. If it can, you will hold it with more confidence than before. If it can't, you needed to know that. This is what Jesus meant by bringing forth what is within you. The process of active examination is itself the spiritual practice. The Gnostic texts are remarkably consistent on this point. The examined thought is the free thought. The unexamined thought belongs to whoever planted it. The second step is to notice where your certainty comes from. The next time you find yourself strongly certain about something, ask, did I arrive at this, or was I handed it? There is a texture difference between knowledge you have genuinely worked through and knowledge you have absorbed. Earned knowledge has uncertainty at the edges. You know where it gets complicated. You remember the questions you couldn't fully resolve. Absorbed knowledge tends to feel seamless, complete, without gaps. That seamlessness is the sign. Real thinking leaves marks. Pre-packaged belief comes smooth. This is not about being skeptical of everything. It's about knowing which of your beliefs are actually yours. The third step is for those of you willing to go further. Read the Gospel of Thomas. You can find it in any academic translation of the Nag Hammadi library, available for free through several university archives online. It is not long. 45 minutes to read the whole thing cover to cover. It reads differently from the canonical Gospels. There is no narrative, no birth story, no crucifixion account. It is only sayings, one after another. And many of them will feel like they were written for the question you are sitting with right now. Pay particular attention to Logion 3, Logion 70, and Logion 113. Those 3 passages form the core of what I believe Jesus actually taught about inner authority versus external control. Logion 3 says the kingdom is not in the sky and not in the sea. It is inside you and outside you. It has always been there. The Archonic system, whatever form it takes, cannot take it from you. It can only convince you it was never there. Logion 113. When the disciples ask when the kingdom will come, Jesus says it will not come by waiting. It will not be said, here it is, or there it is. It is spread upon the earth, and people do not see it. That is not a description of heaven. That is a description of present moment awareness. Of a kind of seeing that exists right now and is blocked not by distance, but by conditioning. Don't read them once. Read them 3 times over 3 different days. The second reading will land differently than the first. I can almost guarantee it. Here's the one error that most people make when they start down this path. They replace one authority with another. They leave their church and immediately join a community built around a different charismatic leader. They trade one set of absorbed beliefs for another and call it awakening. That is not what Jesus described in the Gospel of Thomas. He described returning to the source inside yourself. That source does not belong to any teacher, including the one talking to you right now. Here's what you can realistically expect. In the first week, discomfort. The friction of genuine questioning feels like instability at first. It is not instability. It is movement. After a month of deliberate practice, you will start hearing the sign in conversations you've been having for years. Someone will say something, and you will recognize that it has no personal origin, that it came from a source unchanged, unprocessed, transmitted intact. You will hear it differently, with consistency. You will know the difference between your thoughts and your programming. That distinction, according to the Gnostic texts, is the beginning of what they called gnosis, not a belief system, a kind of seeing. Let's go back to where we started. You came into this video having heard, probably your whole life, that the Bible is complete, that church authority is spiritually legitimate, and that doubt is the enemy of faith. You've now seen that 52 documents were recovered from the Egyptian desert in 1945, that the Council of Nicaea was a political decision made 300 years after Jesus lived, and that the Gnostic texts describe a specific and identifiable sign of controlled thinking. You've understood who benefits from keeping that sign invisible, and you have 3 steps you can begin this week. In 20 minutes, you have covered ground that most people never get the opportunity to cover, not because the information was unavailable, but because no one pointed them toward it. You are not the same person who clicked on this video. You now know what the sign looks like. The question is what you choose to do with that knowledge. And this is only the surface. The Pistis Sophia goes much deeper into the specific mechanisms the Gnostic texts describe, including what they call the counterfeit spirit, which maps with uncomfortable precision onto modern psychological concepts of ego identification. That is a full video on its own. If you want that video made, leave the word Archon in the comments. That one word tells me there's enough demand to go deeper. If this reached you today, if something in it landed, share it with someone you trust. Not to argue, just to open a door. Remember, a person who cannot bring forth what is within them can only hand you what was placed inside them. That is the sign. Now you can see it. We'll talk again soon.